There was definitely some kind of an intelligence failure, or so it looks like it, because the world was expecting things to progress in a slightly slower pace. But I think it was sheer ignorance. I think the larger point that a lot of people are missing out on is the ideological part of Taliban. Kabul is speaking a different voice, but the provinces are speaking a very different voice. So until unless they form a government structure or an institution, a state institution, I think it's very difficult to say what is it that Taliban really wants out of Afghanistan currently. I mean, the very reason they wanted power away from Afghani government is because they were infidels. They were listening to America. They weren't listening to Islam. If they remain true to their ideology, the situation is going to be very grim for the minority community.
Namaste. Over the last few days, we have seen videos, we have read articles about what's happening in Afghanistan, and there's a muddled understanding of what's happening there. So to make sense of whatever we have seen, we have read, and we have seen those viral videos of what's happening there. We have Soumya Chaturvedi today with us. Thank you, Soumya ji, for joining us. Soumya Chaturvedi is a research scholar, a research fellow at India Foundation, a lawyer by education. She holds a postgraduate degree from Jindal School of International Relations and a specialization in Asia Pacific security from University of Birmingham, UK. Her research interests include internal security, terrorism, peace and conflict studies. Since August 2019, she is steering the Jammu Kashmir Security Tracker project as a part of her endeavors to contribute towards the field of counterterrorism in India. That's great. I welcome you, Soumya ji.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so directly get to the issue. So, how did it come to this? In July, we had the US president make a statement that Taliban would not take over Kabul. And then just a week earlier, we had so-called US intelligence report which says that Kabul might fall in 90 days. But within a week, within 4 days, we are here. So how did the world miss all of this? So how do you make sense of these things? What has happened, Soumya ji?
Okay, I think to begin with, there was definitely some kind of an intelligence failure, or so it looks like it, because the world was expecting things to progress in a slightly slower pace. But I think it was sheer ignorance, from at least where I see it. When US announced that they want to withdraw from Afghanistan, there were secret peace talks happening. Then there was a Doha agreement that was signed. So eventually, the American intentions were out there, and they were very clear that they are withdrawing. And if you notice, the agreement very specifically said that not only is the US Army withdrawing, but they're also going to withdraw all kinds of technical support, which essentially meant that the Afghan national forces are going to fall weak. And eventually, like it or not, when America is gone, Afghanistan national forces will be on their own. Now, over the years, it has been very obvious that Taliban had started gaining a lot more momentum. They had started gaining a lot more pace. Slowly, they had started entering into areas that had never been in their control, which is again a very, very remarkable incident to notice. And I think it was one ignorance that people did not see, that Taliban had actually captured a lot more border posts. They had captured a lot more provincial capitals from the very beginning. And I think largely it was the intelligence failure. But America, I think, was very well aware that they were leaving, and this would have happened eventually, like it or not. And America had to leave someday or the other. They can only fight a war so long. So I think it wasn't a surprise that Taliban came into power. The pace definitely has been very surprising, but that's largely because they did not face a lot of resistance. America was out of picture. Afghan forces did not have technical support, so even if they had equipments, they didn't know how to use them. So I think the element of surprise only came in the pace, not really in the part where Taliban started gaining control of a lot of provinces, a lot of border posts, which also meant that they had a lot more money now to fight the war. So I think, coming back to the point that I think people were ignorant, largely ignorant. They took it like one another Taliban episode that happened ages back. It'll be something on those lines where there'll be a gradual increase in Taliban's presence. So I think, that's where the world failed.
How do you make sense of this? We had this Heart of Asia, then Heart of Asia Istanbul, then we had the US Taliban deal. So we read and we had a hope that something good would happen. Even if the government falls, there might be some understanding with the Taliban, so that we have some sane government in place in Afghanistan. But what happened to all that? I mean, the Doha,
Right.
whether it's the peace deal or the Heart of Asia conference, and over the years of negotiations,
Right.
and none of us, none of these, stakeholders saw this coming. Or
Mhm.
was there something? You said intelligence failure, of course, yes.
Right.
Uh, was there something else we are missing from the whole picture? And
Yes.
some
I think
areas
there's
not
a
never took into consideration.
sorry, yeah. I think the larger point that a lot of people are missing out on is the ideological part of Taliban. So I think one thing, of course, is that America started the peace deal without taking the Afghani government into consideration. So eventually, you had an outside power negotiating with a rebel group without taking the government, into picture. It's like saying that your parents have decided the college that you have to go to, and now you're forced to go to that college. You have no say. That's exactly what happened. So I think any kind of peaceful transition between the erstwhile Afghanistan government and Taliban was impossible to start with, and they were never even brought into the negotiation picture. So even if you read Doha Agreement, it's between America and Taliban about
Right.
how when America goes, they will negotiate on a ceasefire. So that agreement in itself was highly flawed. And I think that can be a conversation of its own, the kind of lacunas that agreement had. But I think the larger picture is the ideological one. Now, Taliban's head is called the Amirul Mominin, which basically means commander of the faithful. Now, this is a person called Akhundzada, Mullah Akhundzada. Now, the problem is that when Al Qaeda wages a war, they wage a war saying that they want an Islamic caliphate whose head will be the Amirul Mominin. So you've got Taliban on one hand, whose head is Amirul Mominin. Al Qaeda wants to wage a war in the name of Amirul Mominin. So essentially, Taliban and Al Qaeda are not two different entities. They are part of the larger same organization. So even if you want to have political talks with Taliban, in one way or the other, you're legitimizing the Al Qaeda's cause. So I think that's where any kind of negotiation with Taliban would have resulted in the kind of mess that it has because of the very ideology for which Taliban was formed. If you go back into history on how Taliban's formation took place, Taliban is basically talibs. Talibs are students of radical Islam. These were people who thought that what America is doing to Afghanistan, what Mujahideens are doing, isn't the right way to go ahead. And you need an all-out Islamic society where Sharia is followed. So, if you want to negotiate with an outfit that is so strong in its belief, it's but obvious that you will not have a very democratic, peaceful transition.
Right.
You had to have this violence escalate. I think, again, like we discussed, the intelligence failure, of course, was an important bit. But I think largely America withdrew much before than it should have. The manner in which it withdrew left the Afghani forces very, very weak. And I think that was the biggest blunder that has happened. There was no resistance to Taliban or an outfit that really wants radical Islamist ideologies out there. So
Okay.
I think any kind of peace, if somebody was expecting it to be a peaceful transition, and I think then they were really, really living in a cuckoo's world or a cuckoo's world. It wasn't going to happen anyway.
You made a very important observation, like Al Qaeda and Taliban.
Right.
And there is some kind of debate saying that there could be a tough war between Al Qaeda and Taliban. But since you made it clear that there's no such sort of thing, and it's the one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, what will happen to the other forces in Afghanistan who might be part of the Taliban and Al Qaeda, and those warlords who are not, as yet they're not part of Taliban. Right. So how will this dynamic play out? Are there any factions in Al Qaeda who are not really aligned to the Taliban and the warlords? So how do you think this dynamic would play out?
So if you see ideologically, and also in terms of sheer evidences, when Osama bin Laden was demanded by America, Taliban refused to give Osama bin Laden, who was then part of the Al Qaeda group. So it is very obvious that Taliban really wanted to protect Al Qaeda for a very long time. Now, both of them fight for a similar cause. So it is very obvious that they will have a lot of convergences. Now, Al Qaeda, like any other organization, is a huge organization with a lot more fragments. But I think they are largely united. I think they might call themselves with different names, or they might function differently, but they operate under the same network. So
Right.
I think largely Al Qaeda and Taliban still are under a common umbrella, so to say. But the other fragments, of course, who have earlier fought against Taliban during 2001, 1996, 2001, and even before that, for that matter,
Right. Right.
I think these are the fragments that are now looking for a lot more international support. It's very obvious that when Taliban was gone away with and an Afghani government came up and there were successive elections, they may or may not have been, all say democratic. They were fraudulent elections as well. But either which way, a lot of these warlords were politically accommodated. Now they all have been ousted out of Taliban. If there is any kind of resistance, it is only a matter of time when they start gaining a lot more power. You might find countries that will come forth in support of these groups that want to fight Taliban militarily. They might not do it, overtly, but they will definitely do it covertly. But there is some kind of resistance that will definitely come against Taliban. It's only a matter of time to see whether they'll be powerful enough to really challenge Taliban or not.
We see this, local Afghan channel Tolo News and
Right.
report that, Vice President Amarullah Saleh and Ahmad Masood, they are
Mhm.
getting together. I mean, what are the chances that they regroup, and what would be the expected timeline, and would it be really enough to upstage the Taliban in the near future? And I mean,
Yeah.
in case your coalition, anti-Taliban coalition forms,
Right.
what are the kind of timeline we are looking into?
So I think there is nothing immediately that's going to happen. It's going to take months, if not years, for something to even look like a resistance against Taliban. The If you remember the pictures of 1996, the way Taliban looked then and the way it looks now, there's a remarkable difference. They look a lot more polished. They have attended a lot of diplomatic conclaves, and they have had a lot of diplomatic negotiations with various heads of state. I mean, US, for all its for all that it has done, it gave it a negotiating power. It gave it a bargaining power by officially recognizing them. So I
Right.
think they have become a little more diplomatically savvy. They know they have their game up their sleeves. They know what they want to do. So I think it's only a matter of time before we can even understand what is this Taliban 2.0 going to even look like.
Okay.
Until unless we understand what is it that their main agenda is. Just sometime before I was reading a news headline somewhere, although it's not confirmed, but Taliban has given some kind of assurances for women rights and to certain minority communities. Now, if you see the basic agenda why Taliban was formed, these assurances don't really go hand in hand. It's absolutely against the very core reason why they were even formed. So I think it's only a matter of time to understand how much is Taliban going to stick to its ideology, how much is it going to move beyond it. And I think that will eventually determine the kind of resistance there will be for it. So if at all, a reformed or a pure Taliban 2.0 is coming, which is more political, and maybe it will be an ultra conservative Islamic society like say Saudi Arabia, or to the extent of UAE or Qatar, then you might not find a very strong resistance against them. But if they do become a very violent, or if the 1996 2001 Taliban is the one that's going to repeat now, then you might find a lot more resistance coming against them. But I think it's something that's going to take a longer time than we think. I think this mess will somewhat be there for the next 5 to 7 years at least, and if not, then it will stay for more.
I mean, that's pretty concerning. I mean,
Yes.
for the region and especially India, right?
Absolutely. If you actually see economically, or at least what the pandemic has done economically to all the countries, I don't think any country has the incentive to put their men in their boots on the ground in Afghanistan. Nobody really wants to send their army. Also, like what America did, they started a war that they could never end. And look at what happened. Taliban has been replaced with Taliban.
Yes.
So I think the lesson learned is that you may not be in the best position to send your men out there to fight them. But what you can do is maybe diplomatically tie their hands in one way or the other, economically tie their hands in one way or the other, and see if they can be a better society. If not, then all these resistance, I think it will take a longer time to crop up, and it's a long game.
So, I mean, I think everybody is figuring out how to deal with Taliban, the Afghanistan under Taliban. And we are seeing reports of how Taliban is behaving as Taliban 2.0, as you said, in a policed way in Kabul. But we are also hearing reports of in the provincial capitals and the provinces where they're captured, it's a different old Taliban, where the flogging has been reported, deaths have been reported, killings have been reported, mass killings have been reported. So they are playing a good game. So related to this, can you give us an overview of what the rule under Taliban would look like, given the past experience in the 90s and the early 2000s? Especially if you could elaborate about the rights of women, education under Taliban, the rights and lives of religious minorities. So if you can give a picture of what the life of Afghans under Taliban could be, that would help us to understand the scenario which we are looking at.
I think if the horrors of late 90s and early 2000s, if we revisit them, then the situation was deplorable. Women, most women, so because they practice Sharia, and Sharia also has provisions where they can ostracize women. They're stone pelting against women. Hands are chopped off if they're found doing something or the other. So I think the brutality in the criminal law part of Sharia is very evident. And if that's what they want to reimpose, then situation is going to be equally bad, even with Taliban 2.0. Like you said, Kabul is speaking a different voice, but the provinces are speaking a very different voice. So until and unless they form a government structure or an institution, a state institution, I think it's very difficult to say what is it that Taliban really wants out of Afghanistan currently. I think it's too, as if now we don't even know who will be the president of the new government in Taliban or within Taliban. Ideally, the idea is that the Amirul Mominin should be the one who will be heading it. But then somewhere or the other, they're saying the guy who did the political negotiation, Mullah Baradar, he might be declared the president of Afghanistan under Taliban. So I think until and unless they have a structure in place, even they are not sure of how to go ahead. And like you said, it's sometimes easy to incite people or instigate people by giving them all kinds of assurities, and these are the fighters. So maybe they want a lot more violence. They are the ones who want to relive the horrors of 1996. But maybe Kabul wants things differently. But until unless they declare it so, I don't see any reason why we should believe that they'll be reformed. I mean, the very reason they wanted power away from Afghani government is because they were infidels. They were listening to America. They weren't listening to Islam. That was the reason why Taliban wanted power in the first place. So I think if they remain true to their ideology, the situation is going to be very grim for the minority community. They are not even considered Muslims. Now, these are smaller sects within Islam, but they're not even considered part of it. So, of course, they'll be alienated in one way or the other. With regards to women, the situation will be very, very bad. I think there's enough movements that have already started about, standing with Afghani women. So they were, of course, they were not allowed to wear what they want to. They had to be in burqa to the extent that their ankles or toes should not be visible. I think the fact that a school education for women, I think that should be an idea that should be completely ruled out. Okay. I don't see why Taliban with such extreme Islamist ideologies would want women educated. Then, of course, there's the idea of sex slaves. Women will be taken in as sex slaves. But what's more concerning is that these ground fighters of Taliban, these people are not the ones who are, educated. These are your larger masses. Now, these are the people who you have to accommodate in the society. Now, what do? They're not going to go out and plow fields and do agriculture. Or they're not going to suddenly join skill development centers, learn data entry, and somehow become part of MNCs. Exactly. So they are still going to live the barbaric life that they're used to. They might modify to some extent, but I don't see a reason why they have any incentive to, live a more civilized life, so to say. And of course, as long as this sentiment resonates in the society, the life of minorities is going to be a living hell. And women are, of course, they'll be the ones to suffer on, if not to the biggest extent, but to a very, very large extent, they'll be the one who will be suffering. And if you see the way the videos in which the people are trying to flee away from the country,
Exactly.
it makes it very evident that they are very scared of what Taliban can do. So any assurances that comes from a fraction that does not have a strong and a clean history, I don't see a reason why people would really trust them either.
During the earlier regime, the biggest spectacle which the world saw was destruction of Bamiyan Buddhas.
Yes.
And the lives of other minorities was, as horrible as that. So what are the percentages of Hindus, Sikhs, or Christians we are looking at in Afghanistan currently, and how were they treated earlier during the previous regime? And in case, if we could elaborate on the way they were treated, as Kafirs, they have a different, plan for them, the Kafirs. So how were they treated, and what are the kind of percentages and numbers we are looking at in Afghanistan right now?
I think when you say religious minorities, the numbers are very, very low. You will hardly find Hindus, Sikhs, probably, although there hasn't been a census that was possible in a place like Afghanistan for ages now. So nobody really knows the exact figures as of today. But my estimates would say that religious minorities are not more than, say, 10 to 20%. I think 20% is also an exaggeration. They won't be more than 10% religious minorities. So Sikhs, Christians would be far less. It's the ethnic minorities which will be far, far lower. So you've got Hazaras, you've got Tajiks, you've got Uzbeks. So you've got a lot of people now. And the problem is that because over the years, the Afghanistan population has changed tremendously. I think it's very difficult now to identify who really is a minority and who isn't, who really is an Afghani. How do you even assure those things? Because there have been such mass violations, and the violence has seen like crests and troughs throughout. So I think it's difficult to understand now who really is an Afghani and who isn't, and how do you even prove it? So I think that still is a very big challenge. With regards to your other question on, I believe, how they were treated before, right? So I think up until, like it or not, minorities always have had a claim that they are treated in par with the majority of the country. So same was with Afghanistan for a while. Of course, when Taliban came, the situation was very, very bad. But when Taliban left, and you had the democratic or the almost democratic governments that came in Afghanistan because of America eventually, the situation wasn't this bad. The situation was in fact far better. You had religious places of all these other fragments also functioning. Now, of course, Taliban wasn't completely wiped out of Afghanistan. At some point in time, they've always held control over certain territories. So if you leave that aside and if you only focus on the Ghani government or the Karzai government, then the situation of I think in those situations, minorities often even held power. They had some kind of representation, some kind of accommodation in political structures as well. So I wouldn't say that the situation was absolutely beautiful for them, but things were far, far better. Things were improving. Unless, of course, the Afghanistan government in itself could not remain united against Taliban. And then Taliban gained force, America withdrew, so the situation became even more deplorable.
The other major issue is, all these years, though Taliban was not in power, they had their sources of income, be it drugs, the poppy fields, and mining, and all that. Right. And somewhere there was an understanding that, China had its interest even in mining of the rare earth. And now with, the Pakistan proxy in power in Afghanistan. So how does this China-Pakistan axis and the Taliban, rare earth, this economic, how does the economic of these things play out in the future?
Right. So I think the link of ISI and Afghanistan is well known. Nobody really has to reiterate how the intelligence services in Pakistan essentially trained Taliban. So the nexus between Taliban and Pakistan is, of course, well known.
That's well known, yeah.
China's interest, I think China is more like an economic liberal society. They only care about making money, so they're not largely interested in what kind of a political setup a country has, as long as they can do their business.
Okay.
And I think China's always been very, if not open, they don't even deny the fact that they'll do whatever it takes to make sure that their projects succeed.
Okay.
So, of course, Afghanistan is very, very, very important for China. When you talk about the Belt and Road initiatives, you talk about a lot of gas pipelines. Afghanistan, of course, has a lot of minerals that are yet to be explored. So, I think Afghanistan, that ways, is like a treasure that China would really want to tap, and sooner than later. And even if you see, the Chinese foreign minister met Taliban much before Kabul had fallen.
Yes.
And as soon as Kabul fell, they even came out with a statement saying that they're ready for friendly relations with Taliban.
Taliban, right.
So it essentially signifies that how eager they are to make sure that Afghanistan remains in their kitty. And Taliban needs money. Let's be very frank about it. There is only so long that drugs and opium and arms trafficking and protection money can help them. And of course, they get a lot of funding from donation fundings for that matter. But you also need more steady sources of income. And if China is willing to invest, then why would they not take it? So I think I would not be very confident in saying that China is one of the reasons why Taliban became very economically, say, rich or they were powerful. But I will not deny the possibility of some kind of a connection where China would have helped them in acquire certain things. Because, of course, Pakistan would have, definitely. There's no denying that.
Right, right.
And I was reading a report some time back that the kind of turnovers that these terrorist organizations have, I'm not sure if it was Al Qaeda or Taliban, but their annual turnover is close to $400 million.
Okay.
And Islamic State, on the other hand, is at $2 billion.
Now, since we just talked about China, and so it's almost like China would have, it involve Afghanistan in its Belt and Road initiative, and it's getting a free pass. Through the Gilgit-Baltistan Wakhan corridor and POGK. It's under Pakistan right now.
Right.
This is the economics part of it. So, what are the security implications for India? And is India ready? What are the security steps India could take in order to ensure it safeguard its own territories, both economically and also at the border?
I think one, strategically speaking, Afghanistan is important for India. One, because when you've got China and Pakistan, both not so friendly neighbors on both the sides, you need more friendly countries around you. Now, if you recall Chabahar port, when India was very, very excited about the Chabahar port coming up in Iran, the only way it can connect to Central Asia was if Iran and Afghanistan work in tandem. Now, with Afghanistan lost, there's nothing that can happen to the Chabahar port. There's nothing that India can get out of the Chabahar port. Okay. So Afghanistan critically that way becomes very important because it's the only way through which India can access Central Asia. Now, of course, it cannot do so via Pakistan or China. It has to happen through Chabahar, Iran, and then Afghanistan, and then into the Central Asian nations. So, of course, that is one strategic loss if Taliban and India cannot negotiate on some common grounds. Now, coming on to the other important aspects on, say, when it comes to terrorism. So, of course, when you talk of Taliban, it's very difficult to not talk of terrorism.
Exactly.
The problem is when you have somebody who's, advocating for an all-out extreme Islamic society. They might call it an emirate, but they have a faction that wants to create a caliphate.
Yes, true.
So when Mosul fell, the kind of recruitments increased for Islamic State were remarkable. Mm-hmm. The biggest scare is now with Taliban in power, what happens to Al-Qaeda's call for an Islamic caliphate? Do they get a step closer? Because now they also have a territory with them, which is willing to, willing to live in an old medieval kind of an Islamic society. So does that mean that the radicalization will increase? Does that mean new recruits for terrorism will increase within India? That's something to be watched out for. I think it's very, very important for India to make sure that foreign terrorists do not enter India. This had happened last time as well. It cannot happen this time, because I think right now the situation in Jammu Kashmir has increased tremendously. It's been a remarkable increase in the way the security forces have taken control of terrorism. There are hardly about say 25 to 30 identified foreign terrorists in Jammu Kashmir, which is a very, very big achievement. But if suddenly this increases, that's when the security risk multiplies, because you've got foreign trained people who are trained in Islamic jihad, who are scholarly trained, so to say. When they come and they radicalize youth, they become the charismatic leaders, and people do get radicalized far more easily. So I think on that front, it's again a very tricky situation. I think again, diplomatically speaking, whether India should talk to Taliban or whether they should fight Taliban is something that's going to be a larger question, which I think only time can tell. We need to understand that when Taliban now is in power, what is it that they really want to achieve? Until unless we have some kind of a clarity that what they say is what they mean,
Right.
I think it's difficult to engage with them on any front. We're talking about India becoming a Vishwaguru. How does that happen if they're supporting a country that is outrightly killing its minorities?
Right.
I think that's where the tricky part comes in. For all you know, maybe Taliban's ideology has now taken a backseat and they are not, they want more power than ideology. That could be a scenario
Okay.
where the ideology was just a bait to make sure that they have more people fighting for them, and now when they have power they might shrug it off. It may happen. If that happens, then there's still a chance that India would negotiate with them, but I really see the chances of that happening to be very, very bleak. So there are some strategic concerns for India. Of course, if you've got a friendly Taliban, Pakistan, and China, it makes it very, very difficult for India, especially on its northern frontiers. Ladakh, that way, has a lot of strategic importance, and if Taliban can enter Gilgit-Baltistan because of Pakistan's support, and it has got China supporting them through resources, then I think it will be a war that will be very, very tough for India to win. Although again, like I said, Taliban has become a little diplomatically savvy, so they might not indulge with China outrightly against India. If you would have noticed, Taliban never really had any bad things to say about the abrogation of Article 370.
Okay.
Or
Right.
Taliban, even today, they say that they're willing to talk to India as long as India doesn't give any kind of military support to Afghani government or the erstwhile Afghani government. So I think Taliban is also keeping its options open. India also currently is keeping its options open, but it's, I think, a lot more cautious. They're really closely monitoring what is it that Taliban really wants to do. And I think it will be little too early to comment on, whether India should negotiate or indulge with Taliban. I think only time will tell on what Taliban really stands for, and only then should we take a decision on what we should do.
And in my opinion, Indian approach has been pretty pragmatic. It's not been reactionary.
Absolutely.
So let's hope that, as you say, it'll be a wait and watch approach.
Right.
To end this discussion, I mean, one final thing is the interesting role of Russia. And we see the statement which came out of Russia yesterday, and the role of Central Asian republics, which were many of which were part of the erstwhile USSR. Again, here China has been an early mover. It has got an early mover advantage, and India has been engaging with Central Asian republics. Of late, we have seen a lot of meetings with Central Asian leaders of the Central Asian Republic. So, how will this Russia, China, Central Asian Republic dynamic play out, and how can India leverage it, if at all there's any leverage for India there? That's my final, discussion point. Yeah.
Right. I think Russia is a very, very interesting player in this entire matrix. One thing that should always be kept in mind is that countries always look out for their own interests.
Yes.
And the only important interest for Russia is the anti-US interest. Now that US has left, of course, the backyard now remains open for Russia to try and claim its long-lost supremacy in the region.
Okay.
And the same goes with China. They are more united by their anti-US sentiment. Interestingly, even Iran is a very important, player in this game. Whether the Shia Sunni divide will play in or whether the anti US sentiment will play in is something again that needs to be watched out for.
Okay.
With regards to Central Asian countries, I think there was some report that America is trying to find bases in the Central Asian countries so that even if they are not present in Afghanistan, they can be present around Afghanistan. However, they haven't really succeeded on like completely on that front. So I think what role Central Asian countries play is going to be interesting. If I'm not wrong, it was Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, one of them who went on to say that they can negotiate with Taliban and they can have decent relationships with them. So I think right now everybody is trying to look for their economic interests. Economic liberalism is sort of taking over political liberalism, as one of the IR scholars say that if the often when revolutions happen, liberal minds forget that what political minds want, what they say, they actually believe in it and they actually do it.
Right.
And most countries around are economic liberals. They want to make sure that they make best out of the situation. Vis-a-vis the minorities, because you've got Uzbeks living in Afghanistan, you've got Tajiks living in Afghanistan, and some of them are also part of Taliban, by the way. So it's not that Taliban is an ethnic, they don't have an ethnic homogeneity. So I think that's the reason Central Asian countries are not that worried on the political front, but they will do their best to make sure that they are more economically accommodated in the larger game.
Okay.
And I think, like I said, I think it's too soon for India to even understand how it wants to place it, because of course over the years India and US have grown very, very close. So I think going completely siding by an anti-US or a pro-China sentiment is something that India would be very wary of at the moment. And I think they would want to dehyphenate themselves from all these powers and create a bilateral relationship with Afghanistan, depending on who really is in power, irrespective of all these players around. So I think at least that's how I would see India approach the situation.
Whatever is happening in Afghanistan, India has to take care of itself.
Okay.
And without aligning to any one bloc. And I think India has been doing pretty well on that front.
Right.
And thanks for this. I mean, we have covered a lot of issues, right from the capture of Kabul to the emerging scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad I could come.